My ex-husband Kevin, who had vanished for 2 decades, suddenly reappeared. He was now paralyzed in both legs and needed me and our daughter to care for him. Everyone advised me to ignore him, but I readily agreed. He had abandoned his wife and child years ago, but in all fairness, was I entirely blameless? Ignoring my daughter Lily's surprised stare, I wheeled my ex-husband into our home. I felt reborn. This time that enormous fort would be mine alone. "Mom, do you really want to take care of Dad?" my daughter asked softly. She knew how much I hated my ex-husband to the core for his affair while I was pregnant. As soon as I heard about his accident and paralysis, I opened an expensive bottle of wine to celebrate. Of course not. Hearing my answer, my daughter looked clearly disappointed, pursed her lips but said nothing more. "Not just me but us. After all, he's your biological father, and now he's paralyzed. Don't you think we should help him a little?" My daughter hesitated for a few seconds, finally replying kindly. Hearing that, I chuckled inwardly. This time I wanted to see if she was truly filial. In my previous life, my ex-husband Kevin cheated on me while I was pregnant. Furious, I decisively divorced him, even though I was 7 months pregnant. After the divorce, Kevin still harassed me for a few months, but when he learned I had given birth to a daughter, he never appeared in my life again. At that time, I had to be both father and mother to raise my child. I had to work 3 jobs simultaneously, sleeping only 3 hours a day, working to the point of exhaustion and illness. It was difficult. I had to wait until my daughter graduated from university, found a job she loved, and could support herself. Just when I thought life was finally looking brighter, Kevin came looking for me. After leaving, Kevin had lived very well, not only having a son with his mistress, Vera, but also accumulating considerable wealth, until he was paralyzed in both legs due to an accident. Vera suddenly disappeared with the assets, leaving him penniless and without anyone to care for him. He then remembered. He still had an ex-wife and a daughter. In my past life, when Kevin came looking for me, I had chased him out of the house with a broom. My daughter then blamed me for being heartless, saying, "How could I be so cold to her biological father?" I didn't explain anything. Afterwards, Kevin threatened me, saying that if I didn't let him into the house, he would go to my daughter's workplace to cause trouble, letting everyone know my daughter abandoned her biological father. In that moment, I panicked. I was afraid he would mess up the job my daughter had worked so hard to get. So, I had to compromise, bringing him home and taking care of him diligently. My daughter was very happy, calling him Dad affectionately every day when she came home. But she always used work as an excuse and never lifted a finger to help me. On the contrary, she even hinted that I should dress up nicely. Once, my daughter even secretly locked me and him in a room all night. No matter how much I knocked, she wouldn't open it. The next morning, when I asked her why, she just shrugged, saying she had fallen asleep. At that time, I truly believed my daughter was just careless. A year later, Kevin passed away due to complications from the accident. I thought I was finally free, but Vera reported me to the police. Only then did I learn that they had never divorced. Vera sued me in court, claiming that I was the one who had killed her husband. In the end, although I was exonerated because Kevin's death occurred in my house, I still had to bear some responsibility. I was forced to sell my only house to pay compensation. The only inheritance Kevin left was a dilapidated old house, not worth much. My daughter was stunned when she heard the news. She had wanted to pair me with Kevin, hoping that even if he fell on hard times, there would still be some assets to seize. But in the end, he was truly poor, hiding nothing. This made my daughter angry, turning her anger on me. "Mom, you knew he was no good. Yet you still brought him home and took care of him. Why did you demean yourself? Haven't you had enough of men?" Before I could even explain, my daughter packed up her things, moved into the dilapidated old house, and didn't even leave me a key. She didn't even ask where I would live after selling the house. Later, during a routine health checkup, I discovered I had cancer. There was a surgery abroad with a 70% cure rate for this disease, but it cost $300,000. Just then, the old house my daughter inherited was about to be demolished, and the compensation would be up to $1.5 million. I was overjoyed, feeling like I was saved. I went to my daughter's new address, a palatial mansion area. Standing in front of the shiny, imposing door, I pressed the doorbell. The door didn't open, but my daughter's voice echoed from the screen. "What are you doing here, Mom? Mom came to visit you. Mom has something to tell you." My daughter's voice became impatient. "What is it? Hurry up, I'm busy. I don't have time for you." I looked around, thought for a moment, then resolutely opened my mouth. "Mom is sick. Mom needs." Beep. The video screen went black. I was stunned. No matter how much I pressed the bell, there was no response. My heart sank like ice. Until the moment I closed my eyes in death, my daughter never visited me once. Perhaps heaven pitied me, giving me a chance to be reborn. Our family of 3 met again, after 20 years, in this ironic situation. Of course, before accepting my ex-husband, I wanted to confirm one thing. "Kevin, are you divorced?" Kevin clearly didn't expect me to ask this question. He hesitated, replying vaguely, "Vera has left already." "Why are you asking this?" The hand gripping the wheelchair armrest tightened, revealing his anxiety. "Kevin, I'm very happy that you've come back to find me and our daughter." I pretended to wipe away tears, saying with embarrassment, "But if you're not divorced, then wouldn't I be a third party in other people's eyes? I don't want to become a homewrecker." As I spoke, I pushed Kevin's wheelchair towards the door, causing him to panic. "After my accident, Vera just left. I can't find her." My daughter chimed in, urging, "Mom, if you send Dad to a nursing home, wouldn't that be too cruel?" I didn't stop, seriously saying to Kevin as I pushed him out, "Kevin, to avoid gossip, I can only take you to a nursing home first. Don't worry, I'll find Vera. As soon as you two are divorced, I'll bring you home." Kevin's face showed displeasure, but faced with this completely reasonable request, he had to agree. "Let me take you to the nursing home." In my previous life, it wasn't until Kevin passed away that I learned they had never divorced. Vera had just secretly run away because she was unwilling to care for a paralyzed man. Kevin's son was still in high school and couldn't take care of him. He had considered going to a nursing home, but was afraid of being lonely and bullied by the nurses there. So, I don't know what twisted logic led him to think of me. Sure enough, men only remember their loyal wives when they're down on their luck. Knowing the story, I had to take advantage of it thoroughly. I needed to find Vera. While Kevin was in the nursing home, I hired a private investigator and quickly found information about her. I heard that when Vera learned Kevin had clung to me, she brazenly returned home. The interesting thing was, Kevin's precious son didn't reveal any information to his father, even adamantly claiming he hadn't seen his mother. It was said that since Kevin moved out, another man frequently came and went from their house, probably Vera's lover. Her scheme was to wait for Kevin to die, then legitimize the assets she had taken. In my previous life, because of my appearance, she even threw me out of my house, gaining quite a windfall. Money, lover, and soon to be rid of her husband. All the good things fell into her hands. In the past few days, I didn't leave Kevin alone in the nursing home. I occasionally brought fruit to visit him, peeling an apple or a pear for him, making him think I was still the obedient ex-wife he could easily manipulate. Therefore, he both complained and expressed regret about the past, hoping I would quickly bring him home so that family happiness could heal him. I smiled kindly. He was the most important chess piece in my rebirth game. Not only would I bring him home, I would also bring him back to his old house. What's that saying? Remember to visit home often. After grasping Vera's movements, I decided to bring Kevin home. But before going to the nursing home, I stopped by the labor market. Just as I reached the entrance, I heard loud scolding. "Miss Martha, what am I going to say to you? How many times is this you've been complained about? Last time you were complained about for hitting a vegetative patient. I spent so much effort to keep you, and this time you dared to lay hands on an elderly person who was conscious and even gave them sleeping pills before hitting them. Don't you know every house has surveillance cameras now?" I peeked through the crack in the door. The woman called Miss Martha was about 50 years old, large and strong, her arms as thick as thighs. "You still want to work to pay off your son's house debt? Don't even dream about it. You're blacklisted in this whole industry now." Scolded relentlessly, Martha walked out dejectedly. I quickly stepped forward, greeting her warmly. "Auntie, come work for my family, okay? My house doesn't have cameras." "Mom, why are you so silly?" I looked at my daughter, puzzled. Dad was so rich and smart when he was young. How could he let a woman swindle all his money? He must be testing us. Testing what? Testing if we're worthy to inherit his assets, of course. It's always like that in movies. Good people will have good outcomes, my daughter said excitedly. Mom has less education than me. Just listen to me, it's definitely right. Mom must bring Dad back before that brat takes care of him meticulously. Only then can we get more assets and have a good life. You really think so? Of course. My daughter glanced at me. Mom didn't study as much as me. Just listen to me, it's definitely right. Just as I was struggling to find a reason to bring Kevin home, unexpectedly, my daughter had solved the problem for me. I pretended to hesitate for 2 minutes, then nodded. My daughter jumped up for joy, as if she had already foreseen a happy life ahead. Seeing her excitement, a strange feeling welled up in my heart. What bad karma had I created to give birth to such a child? Lily, Kevin has never cared about you in all these years. Don't you hate him? Urging me out of the house, my daughter replied. Men are all prone to making mistakes. Him coming back proves he still has Mom and me in his heart. That's our blessing. Mom, I know you're still angry, but Dad. My daughter's voice softened. Dad must still be hiding a large sum of money, pretending to be pitiful to test Mom and me. If I weren't his own daughter, why would he let Mom take care of him while he's still giving us a chance to test us? Mom must seize it. Finishing speaking, my daughter looked me up and down and gave me a meaningful glance. I was speechless, really wanting to slap her, but now was not the time. I evaded, changing the subject clumsily, then took the car keys and left the house with my daughter. Arriving at the nursing home, as soon as she saw Kevin, my daughter rushed over, hugging his arm and coyly calling, "Dad." My daughter hugged Kevin's arm tightly while meticulously asking about his health. "Dad, I had to try so hard to convince Mom to bring you home. Dad must reward me." Lily nestled into Kevin's arms, her tone full of hidden meaning, just short of asking him to hand over all his assets to her. "Good girl." Kevin stroked her head, praising her with a few words. "It's nothing much." A scene of a loving father and filial daughter unfolded before my eyes. Just like in my previous life, Lily never spared sweet words for her father, saying whatever he wanted to hear. Every day she coaxed Kevin to be happy, but when it came to taking care of Kevin, she hadn't done anything. Kevin was paralyzed in both legs, unable to control his bowel movements. Cleaning up after him naturally fell to me. My daughter demanded that I hand wash Kevin's clothes because she believed washing machines harbored too many bacteria. She was picky about food, preferring strong flavors, while Kevin had to eat bland food. So for each meal I had to cook separately for everyone. At that time, blinded by maternal love, I thought my daughter was a caring and understanding child. Therefore, I didn't want past grievances to affect her filial piety. It wasn't until I was diagnosed with cancer that I realized everything she did was calculated. Her nature was cold and ruthless. I tried to regain my composure, pulling myself out of the memories of my past life and interrupting the emotional moment between father and daughter. "All right, Lily, stop being clingy. Quickly pack up to take your dad home." I turned back, saying to Martha, "Oh, Miss Martha, remember to empty the bedpan, then wash it clean and put it away carefully." Hearing my instructions, my daughter rolled her eyes, but because she didn't want to show her displeasure in front of her father, she leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Mom, I don't know how to do it. You go do it." I deliberately replied loudly, "Lily, it's not that Mom doesn't want to do it. But after all, your father is still legally someone else's husband. It's not appropriate for Mom to do these things. But you are different, you're Kevin's biological daughter. You taking care of your dad is perfectly reasonable." After speaking, I slyly glanced at Kevin with a shy expression, and he immediately chimed in, adding a hat of filial piety to his daughter's head. "Lily is so filial." "Thank you, honey." Unlike her sloppy appearance at our previous meeting today, I had prepared carefully. I wore a cheongsam similar to the style I used to wear when I was in love with Kevin, only the color had changed from pink to dark blue. Even so, my slender figure still managed to exude the charm of the cheongsam even more intensely. Kevin's eyes lit up, his attitude clearly more attentive. Humph! Men, even paralyzed in both legs, still can't stop dreaming. I turned around, mouthing 2 words to my daughter. Test of heart. It was my daughter who brought it up, so even if she cried, she had to carry it out herself. My daughter looked displeased, but still reluctantly picked up the bedpan and went to the bathroom. Seeing Kevin looking at her, she immediately switched to a well-behaved expression. I chuckled inwardly. My good daughter, this is just the beginning. After washing the bedpan, I instructed my daughter to pack up Kevin's belongings. She was drenched in sweat, while I sat beside Kevin happily watching short videos. When we arrived home, the issue of room allocation arose again. Martha arrived to work on time, having just escaped the risk of losing her job. Of course, she wouldn't dare to cause any trouble. Kevin was also quite satisfied with Martha's work. When she learned I had hired a caregiver, my daughter immediately suggested keeping Martha at home, convenient for 24-hour care for her father. I refused without thinking. Mom is really too selfish. During the day there's Martha. At night there's me taking care of him. Mom doesn't have to lift a finger. The dirty, heavy work is all done by me. After hand-washing the clothes and cooking a nutritious dinner for Kevin, my daughter finally erupted, sullenly looking at Kevin's tightly closed door and complaining softly to me. Why do you say Mom doesn't do anything while leisurely playing cards on her phone? I absent-mindedly replied. Mom plays with your dad, watches videos with him, takes him for walks, brings him joy. That's also contributing. Moreover, didn't you say this was Dad's test for us? Now you're the one doing the most, interacting with him the most. Later, when he thinks back, he will definitely only have your image in his head. And regarding the assets. Hearing the word assets, my daughter's eyes lit up, no longer complaining about the work she had to do. Mom, besides the test, there's also remarriage. Mom, don't forget. Rest assured. I patted my chest, guaranteeing. This week Mom will make your dad divorce. She was about to say something more, but just then Kevin's voice calling from inside the room rang out. I glanced at it, then waved my hand, signaling to my daughter. Go quickly, your dad must have had another accident. My daughter looked full of resignation as she walked into the room. Looking at her heavy burdened back, I chuckled softly, continuing to open another round of cards. 5 consecutive wins. Truly refreshing. Every evening after dinner, I would push Kevin's wheelchair for a walk, using the excuse of getting fresh air. That day, I pushed him to a small square, where a group of people were doing social dancing. 2 people closely pressed together, their bodies swaying gracefully, their lips almost touching, so suggestive it made people blush. Look at that, Kevin. When you get better, we can also learn to dance like that. Kevin looked in the direction I was pointing. The just emerging smile vanished instantly. The 2 people dancing face to face turned their heads, and one of them was a face Kevin was very familiar with. Vera. She was dancing with a man, clinging to him like 2 magnets, inseparable. Their bodies had no space between them. The man continuously whispered in Vera's ear, making her blush. The atmosphere was so heated that just putting a bed there would be enough to turn it into an adults-only scene. Cheers rang out non-stop. Vera smiled charmingly, incessantly. Each time she smiled, Kevin's face turned paler. Approaching closer, clearly seeing the man's face, Kevin was first stunned, then propelled his wheelchair forward, ramming hard into the 2 of them, causing both to stagger. Who is it? Vera turned her head, intending to scold, but when she saw it was Kevin, her face instantly changed, transforming continuously like a running light. During the investigation, I had felt this man looked very familiar, but couldn't remember where I had seen him. Seeing Kevin's reaction, I suddenly understood. This man looked exactly like Kevin's son, so much so that no DNA test was needed to be clear. Kevin was so angry, his veins popped out, struggling to raise his head, holding up 10 fingers and starting to curse at the 2 of them with all sorts of vulgar words. Although his tone was heroic, him sitting in a wheelchair looked no different from a comedic scene. I tried to suppress my laughter, clenching my hands together to avoid bursting out. This scene reminded me of when I was pregnant, catching Kevin and Vera sneaking around at home. At that time I was also like Kevin now, powerless and infuriated. Back then Vera hooked her arm with Kevin's, her head resting on his shoulder, sneering at me. While my pregnant belly was heavy, she coldly uttered a love quote copied from the internet. In love, the one who isn't loved is the third party. Kevin caressed her cheek tenderly, putting his hand between me and her, to protect her from being hurt by me. In my anger, that moment completely destroyed my belief in love. Looking back at the scene before my eyes, everything seemed to be replaying. Vera, who used to be eloquent, now only knew to bow her head, pale and speechless. I guess she wasn't grieving for lost love. Kevin continued to curse relentlessly. Anyway, now the only part of his body that was still agile was his mouth. In his anger, he began to expose Vera's ugly secrets, that her breasts were fake, that she was incontinent, not clean, and went to the gynecologist all day long. Vera finally couldn't take it anymore and retorted, "And you? How many times have you cheated? Why don't you mention it? I've forgiven you 3 times already, yet you still brought disease home to infect me." Kevin retorted, "You're lying. Every time I use protection. How could I get infected? It's you going around fooling around that got infected. No way. I don't have any disease." The man dancing with Vera finally opened his mouth, joining the argument. The people around had long stopped dancing, surrounding them in a circle, watching intently. There were even people calling live streaming. Hearing this part, everyone's expressions were extremely lively, their eyes constantly darting back and forth between the 3 of them. These 3 middle-aged people were truly as ugly as owls, yet loved to make a spectacle. I quietly withdrew from the crowd, standing in the most secluded corner, took out my phone, and recorded this spectacular moment. Kevin's body, after the accident, was as fragile as a leaf drifting in the rain, unable to withstand any impact. When he was out of breath after a long string of frenzied curses, the man took Vera's hand, pulled her into the crowd, and disappeared without a trace. When the people around gradually dispersed, each returning home or continuing to dance, only Kevin stood there, stunned, his eyes fixedly following the direction Vera had just disappeared. I didn't know if, at this moment, he regretted abandoning me that year, choosing to follow Vera, only to waste 20 years raising someone else's son. Serves him right. It was really hard to suppress my laughter. I stood rooted to the spot, readjusting my emotions for a full 10 minutes. Finally, I took a deep breath and approached Kevin. I gently patted his shoulder, leaning close and whispering, "Kevin, let's go home." Kevin seemed to wake up, blankly looking at my face, then down at my hand placed on his shoulder. He softly nodded in agreement. I quietly closed the door, giving her space to exert her full strength. I was afraid if she saw me come home, she would stop immediately. That would be too boring. During the day, I often found excuses to go out, but every afternoon I still pushed Kevin for a walk, mainly for him to see my new hobby, ballroom dancing. I used my pension to buy dress after dress, wearing a different one every day, choosing a handsome old man to dance with for about an hour. As for Kevin, I let him sit in the VIP position, the best viewing angle to watch. His hands gradually weakened. His speech also began to slur. "Don't even mention pushing his wheelchair over here. Touching me," Kevin mumbled, indicating his objection. I also wasn't overbearing, immediately agreeing that next time, I wouldn't bring him out again, letting him just stay home and get well. He was stunned, probably thinking about if he stayed home, he would have to be with Martha all day long. Just thinking of this, he immediately compromised. I didn't know what it felt like for a paralyzed man in a wheelchair to watch his wife ballroom dance intimately with another old man, but I personally felt very comfortable. One day, I called an old man, without noticing I had turned on the speakerphone, and Kevin heard it. He exerted all his strength, turning his wheelchair to face me, his eyes bloodshot, questioning, "Jade, I'm not dead yet. Why are you already messing around with other men?" I didn't feel ashamed at all for being eavesdropped on. On the contrary, I calmly looked into his eyes, answering directly, "That's right. Back then, when I was pregnant, you also couldn't stop yourself from cheating. Now you're about to die. I'm preparing another option beforehand. What's wrong with that?" Kevin was so angry he was speechless, his eyes like they wanted to burst into flames. Now he was no different from a little cat, no longer able to threaten me. "I want to divorce you," Kevin finally managed to roar. "Fine, you go ahead and do it." I shrugged indifferently, even making a gesture inviting him to do it. He had just moved 2 or 3 meters when he ran out of strength. Without anyone pushing the wheelchair, He couldn't even get out of the door, let alone unilaterally file for divorce. I'll call Lily. I'll ask her to take me. Go ahead and call. I leisurely stood watching Kevin searching for his phone. The phone had been hidden by me. Since I suggested my daughter quit her job, she had discovered a new world. Kevin wasn't even dead yet, and she had already used her credit card to travel abroad, disregarding work, just waiting for the day to inherit Kevin's fortune. Discovering he couldn't find his phone, Kevin became even more panicked, starting to throw a tantrum. Now the greatest force he could muster was only knocking over a chair, then collapsing back into his wheelchair, completely exhausted. Looking at that scene, I couldn't help but laugh. I didn't bother to pay attention to him, continuing to call, making a dance appointment, then went into the room to change into an elegant, form-fitting cheongsam, swaying my hips as I stepped out the door without looking back. Under my mental torture and Martha's physical abuse, Kevin finally couldn't take it anymore. Before taking his last breath, he suddenly seemed to regain consciousness, taking my hand and starting to talk about the first time we met over 20 years ago. Back then you wore a ponytail wearing a pale pink cheongsam. You looked so beautiful. I softly scoffed, pushing his hand away, my tone full of sarcasm. That was the day I regretted the most in my life. If I hadn't met you, perhaps my life would have been so much better. Do you know? Since you came back and we lived together, every day I felt disgusted. Kevin glared at me, his face gradually paling, his throat as if choked, unable to speak. His breathing became increasingly difficult, his chest heaving violently, then suddenly stopping. He stared wide-eyed, lying motionless. I reached out to check his breath. Gone. He was dead. The man who had tangled with me for decades had died. I gently placed my hand on his face, closing his eyes for him. After Kevin passed away, I gave Martha a red envelope and also introduced her to a new job, considering it thanks for taking care of Kevin diligently during this time. My daughter didn't call back even once. It wasn't until the third day after Kevin passed away that she rushed back in a panic. At that time I was cleaning up the room, preparing to rent out this house again. As soon as she entered the house, she asked, "Where's my dad?" I pointed to the small box placed on the table and said, "They're over there." I could see she was trying to suppress her emotions, but the upturned corner of her mouth had betrayed her already. Dad died? Died? Now he's all ashes. So where are Dad's assets? They're all ours now, right? My daughter didn't even bother to glance at the box once, hastily asking about her father's assets. Whose assets? I glared at her, then replied, "All mine. What does it have to do with you?" As I spoke, I continued packing my luggage. Initially, my daughter thought I was joking, laughing and bantering with me for a few sentences. But seeing I showed no sign of relenting, she began to truly panic. Mom, what do you mean? I'm Dad's biological daughter. How can Dad's assets not have a share for me? Did you make Dad write a will to transfer everything to you? How could Mom be so shameless? There's no will, but... Hearing no will, my daughter immediately breathed a sigh of relief, not letting me finish speaking, immediately interrupting. If there's no will, just divide it according to the law then. Mom, half for me, half for you. Don't you dare play tricks or I'll see you in court. Looking at her arrogant face, I felt extremely amused, curling my lips, saying, "Do you have any evidence to prove you are Kevin's biological daughter?" She was clearly stunned by this question. I continued calmly, "You weren't even born when your dad and I divorced. On your birth certificate, only my name is listed, and the father's name section is blank." I patiently explained each point to my daughter. To be honest, I had carefully studied these legal points as soon as I was reborn, calculating so meticulously to ensure that all assets would belong to me without sharing with anyone. My daughter didn't believe what I said, but for a moment, couldn't think of any reason to refute it. She hovered anxiously, her eyes glancing over the box containing Kevin's ashes, her tone becoming hardened. I chuckled softly. Finally, I could enjoy this unparalleled luxurious life.